Lesson 6F, Gas Exchange and Transport. Remember, partial pressure is like a push on a gas to move. Gases will move from an area of high partial pressure to an area of low partial pressure, just like a concentration gradient and diffusion. Recall that the solubility of a gas in the solvent is also an important factor. At the alveoli of the lungs, inhaled air has a partial pressure of oxygen of 104 millimeters of mercury and 40 millimeters of mercury for CO2. The blood arriving at the lungs via capillaries has a partial pressure of oxygen of 40 millimeters of mercury and 45 millimeters of mercury for CO2. Because of this difference in pressure, O2 will leave the alveoli and enter the blood, where it will bind to hemoglobin of the red blood cells. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, with the help of carbonic anhydrase, will leave the blood plasma and enter the alveoli of the lungs, where it can be exhaled. This exchange of gases results in the blood oxygen level rising to 100 millimeters of mercury and the CO2 levels dropping to 40 millimeters of mercury. Oxygen is now transported to the different tissues of the body via the circulatory system. Notice, as it arrives at the tissue, the partial pressure of oxygen is now only 95 millimeters of mercury. That is because some of it is used right away by the tissues of the lungs. As it is pumped out to the different parts of the body by the heart, the blood arriving at the tissue has a partial pressure of oxygen of 95 millimeters of mercury and a partial pressure of carbon dioxide of 40 millimeters of mercury. The fluid around the cells of tissue, also known as the interstitial fluid, has a partial pressure of oxygen of 40 millimeters of mercury, and for CO2 it's 45 millimeters of mercury. As you can see, the higher partial pressures of O2 in the blood means that oxygen will enter the interstitial fluid, while CO2 will go from high to low and will enter the blood. The oxygen in the interstitial fluid will in turn diffuse into the cells. The cells have a low partial pressure of oxygen of 20 millimeters of mercury, while carbon dioxide will leave the cells to enter the interstitial fluid because the partial pressure of carbon dioxide inside the cell is 46 millimeters of mercury. Blood that leaves the tissue has given away oxygen and picked up carbon dioxide. This exchange in gases results in partial pressures of oxygen dropping from 95 down to 40 millimeters of mercury, and for carbon dioxide it rises from 40 millimeters of mercury to 45 millimeters of mercury. Remember, carbon dioxide mainly travels in the blood as dissolved carbonic acid or hydrogen carbonate ion with the help of an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. CO2 is now transported to your lungs via the blood circulatory system so that it can be exhaled, and the whole cycle now continuously repeats. I would like to point out that in the two images of oxygen-poor blood arriving at the lungs and oxygen-rich blood leaving the lungs, the partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide remains constant, even though there is gas exchanging. This is because there is a constant flow of oxygen from the outside and a constant flow of CO2 from the blood that keeps these two partial pressures constant. The same is seen at the tissue level, where partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide don't seem to change, even though there is gas exchanging, and that is because the oxygen arriving is constantly being used up by the cells, while CO2 is constantly being created by the cells.
Fresh air entering the lung carries oxygen with a PO2 of 160. The presence of moisture in the lung results in reduction of the PO2 to 104. Fresh air entering the lung carries carbon dioxide with a pCO2 of 0.3. The carbon dioxide delivered to the lung from the blood raises the pCO2 to 40. At the arterial ends of the pulmonary capillaries, oxygen diffuses from the air in the alveoli into the blood, and carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveoli because of differences in partial pressures. As a result of diffusion, at the venous ends of the pulmonary capillaries, the PO2 in the blood is equal to the PO2 in the alveoli, and the pCO2 in the blood is equal to the pCO2 in the alveoli. With no differences in partial pressure, there is no more net movement of oxygen or carbon dioxide. Oxygen diffuses out of the arterial ends of tissue capillaries into the tissue fluid, then into the cells, and carbon dioxide diffuses out of the cells into the tissue fluid, then into the blood because of differences in partial pressures. At the venous ends of tissue capillaries, the PO2 in the blood is equal to the PO2 in the tissue fluid, and the pCO2 in the blood is equal to the pCO2 in the tissue fluid, resulting in no more net movement of oxygen or carbon dioxide. The blood now carries the oxygen and carbon dioxide to the lungs. In the body, all of these exchanges occur simultaneously.